As we navigate this unprecedented period of workplace disruption, the onus is on HR and L&D leaders to find an opportunity amid the crisis. It's time to reinvent learning interventions and to build remote working strategies that are sustainable, manage remote teams more effectively, and launch skilling programs that offer newer skills. It's time to rethink L&D, augmenting training programs during uncertain times, and build capabilities to meet the increasing on-the-demand jobs. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome from People Matters and Upside LMS. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into the topic Rethinking L&D, Building Capabilities and Augmenting Training Programs During Uncertain Times. We are looking forward to hearing from some really interesting insights from our speakers. Quick housekeeping before we get started. If you have any question during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat window. I will bring them up at the end during the 15 minutes reserved for Q&A. You will receive the recording of this webinar in a couple of days, so stay tuned to your inbox. This webcast is brought to you by Upside LMS in association with People Matters. Upside LMS is a leading LearnTech provider of an AI-powered learning management system and a comprehensive on-the-shelf content library called Plethora. It is backed by over 16 years of experience with 50+ awards and recognition and over 1 million happy users worldwide. Joining us today is Dan Bennett, the Group Learning and Development Manager at ISS Facility Services, a leading global provider of facility services with local operations in 77 countries. Dan is an L&D veteran who has worked in the education field for over a decade. At ISS Facility Services, Dan and his team manage online training and solution design at a global level, to the tune of 5 lakh plus users worldwide across in over 50 countries. Dan experience include the design and delivery of online and offline training, large-scale project management, and HR system strategy. His effort at ISS have been recognized through global company awards and national accolades, including Australian HRD magazine and Australian HR awards. Thank you, Dan, for your time and welcome to this session.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us today is Amit Gautam, founder and CEO of Upside LMS. Amit is a learning technology enthusiast and a passionate leader. An IIM and NIT alumni, Amit is the key idea generator for Upside LMS product team, a sales and marketing orchestrator, a learning technology solution consultant for clients and prospects, and a mentor for all the functional heads at his company. Welcome, Amit. It's great to have you here again. Amit, let's kickstart the webcast by exploring something that has been talked about again and again in today's volatile business climate. That is fostering agility in HR and L&D. Over to you.
Thank you, Shruti. So I think I'll start with a little bit of a context of what is happening around us, and everybody is aware is something we cannot miss at all. So while when COVID started and we realized it is something we need to address a little bit more seriously and strongly, it was a kind of an environment of immediacy and panic. More than anything else, we didn't know what to do, so we panicked, and whatever we could decide, we decided. But with now a few months after we realized this is not going to be a temporary situation, it is now kind of morphed into a situation of more anxiety and burnout. With everybody working remotely, pressure on the business, and unemployment rising. So it has now become more an environment where everybody is anxious what is going to happen next, and also a kind of there's a lot of burnout which is happening because we've been working non-stop. We're all under the pump, and that has been the new situation now. And what is also amplifying this anxiety is still not very clear and not knowing what is going to happen in the future. We are still not nobody can put a finger on anything for sure and say, okay, this is going to go over, or this is going to get over by end of March or end of next year. It is still a very, very gray situation. There are countries where things became better and then they again went back to the same spiral. So a lot of these situations are adding to the anxiety overall. And the workforce and the companies are no longer escaping from that fact. So it is affecting everybody in the same manner. And there's also a certain impact in the way we work together. So we all have to work remotely, and it is just not the communication part or the collaboration part. It is also the overall process of making decisions in a company. So in a business, the way we used to make decisions, by collaborating, all of that has changed now. And this has seriously put a lot of demands on the HR and L&D. I think these two departments are the most active departments in the last few months because of the demands being put on them and without any notice. And that is where I think, today we are trying to figure out how to foster agility in HR and L&D functions. Now, I think the one big part is that as a business, as a company, as people who have been skilled in these functions, there is no comparable or even close to the scenario we can fall back on. We don't have any experience, we don't have any precedence of how to deal with the situation. The last pandemic happened way before when we were even born. So in our education, in our experiences in the world around us, there is no examples of how to deal with this situation, which means everything is from scratch. We have to hit trial, we have to error, and then we again have to try to find out the right solution. So the challenge for L&D and HR is dual right now. They have to maintain and also ensure that the workforce is working well, they are safe, they're healthy physically and mentally, but also in the same context also maintain business continuity. So while these two things at some point in time might become conflicting in nature, and there is a trade-off which happens. And I think the biggest challenge also is to how to make sure that everybody is equipped to perform their functions even in the new context. So remotely working and not able to meet anybody in person, taking large decisions, taking big decisions, how to do all of those things in the new context. So I think a kind of a solution for this, and of course this is more of a need, is to foster agility in HR and L&D. Make them more agile as functions. And agility by definition means reacting quickly, adapting fast, and learning to prepare. So the key words being quick reaction, prepare, and adapt. And so sorry. So, and I think one way to deal with this situation and also become more agile is to increase openness in the overall company, and also the way we reacted to feedback in pre-COVID days is to increase our reaction time or decrease our reaction time to the feedback we receive. We don't really have the luxury of time to go over all the feedback, understand what is happening, and then take our own time to plan things. So we need to be more quick in terms of how we react to this feedback. And all of this will also, one big factor in this will also be because of the anxiety and the burnout, which I mentioned a while back. There is also a kind of a risk of losing a key talent, not immediately, but there is a risk, there's a positive risk which it can happen. So while making sure that the current workforce is safe and they're healthy, they're able to perform functions, they have access to all the resources and tools, a very big part of being agile will be to plan succession for the key talent in the company. That is going to be important, and that has to become one of the primary agendas of the L&D and HR function alike. So I think in short, this will also prepare us for how to deal with similar crises in the future.
I think those were some excellent points, Amit, on fostering agility within the teams. Dan, what are your views on agility in HR and L&D in today's world?
I mean, Amit has touched on a lot of great points there, and one of the, I'll be 100% honest with everyone, is I'm not a huge fan of buzzwords in corporate jargon, and agility has been around for a few years now, and I think it needs to be rethought to an extent in the context of COVID, because as Amit said, some of the easy definitions are it's about being adaptable, but what we're seeing now are qualities around resilience and a willingness to move in directions that previously maybe people wouldn't have moved into, and being willing to explore and take new approaches is becoming more important than ever. If there's one thing that's coming across right now, it's that you simply can't act like everything is the same as it was a year ago. Things are changing, and we need to change with them. And what we're seeing from our workforces and from workforces around the world is that priorities are changing, and in many instances those are permanent changes. So you might well be seeing, certainly in the facility management sector where we operate, this long-term rethink of what a traditional workplace looks like, and this explosion of white-collar employees working from home means that we need to rethink what the purpose of an office is. Now it's becoming a more communal space for meetings and collaboration rather than a desk space for a solo worker or a specialist. And more broadly within HR, there's a hope, I think, that more value can then be placed on work-life balance. But what that will also do is it's going to pull leadership and management, including in HR, in directions where oversight and accountability, communication, the quality of collaboration, and from an L&D perspective, how we then go on to support individual level personal development, it's going to be fundamentally different to what we've been seeing before. Part and parcel of what comes with that in terms of responding to feedback, as Amit was saying, is that the experience that an employee will expect from their employer is going to change really rapidly if it hasn't changed in your organizations already. We actually have recently, as I'm sure a lot of you have, performed surveys of our white-collar workers at a number of offices across one particular ISS country. And it was really interesting to see how some of their feedback came through. They had major concerns about their own job security, which is not unreasonable, but their second largest concern, and remember, this is a survey of our office staff in a primarily blue-collar organization, their second concern was for the well-being of our frontliners. Particularly in areas where they may be working in COVID affected environments. With this new focus on working from home, we did find that 60% of our respondents said they were more engaged than they had been working in offices, and 80% of them felt that they were working at or above their previous capacity. But the flip side of that is that we had 20% of them were experiencing difficulties. Where we are going to run into challenges, and Amit touched on this as well, is the risk of burnout, is that we're seeing people saying, yes, I'm more productive, but it's mainly because I'm working more hours. And HR needs to catch up with the impact of people working from home, because 73% of our guys were saying, they're working more than they used to, and we know that fatigue will set in over time with this way of doing things. The novelty factor has very much worn off. Most interestingly for us was the fact that over 3/4 of respondents had said that they would like to continue working from home at least part-time, and only 5% of them had said that they wanted to go back to an office full-time when things were, in inverted commas, back to normal. So when we discuss agility, I think it's very important that HR departments and L&D plays an incredibly strong role in this, work closely with colleagues in areas like IT, because we want to make sure that organizations are now being the right tools and technologies to work and communicate and collaborate with each other. And I think for a lot of organizations, that's going to mean pivoting to platforms like Teams or Zoom or WebEx and so on to facilitate meetings, virtual training, virtual town halls. But unless those are platforms that were a mainstay of your organization before COVID was a factor, it's going to be a heavy involvement of people and culture, or HR, and particularly learning and development, in positioning those tools right, and then making sure that there's guidance in how to use them properly. And I don't just mean, how do I make Teams go full screen, or how do I share my desktop, but also at a cultural level as well. So managers need to understand and be challenged on, when you're running a virtual meeting, are you doing it effectively with your team? There's nothing worse for any of us than joining a badly run virtual meeting where we're all sat like lemons in front of our webcams waiting for something to happen, but because it hasn't been planned well, it's not, it doesn't have the same impact as the face-to-face meetings used to. So we need to help managers and leaders reskill themselves for that kind of environment. And my last comment on this one is around the other 90% of our organization, which is a blue-collar workforce, or traditionally described as blue-collar. Their role is obviously both the same and extremely different in a world that's been affected by a pandemic. So they're demanding a lot more of HR in our organization, in terms of, where is the agility, where is the accountability, where's the communication from our leadership and our HR professionals, because there are heavy anxieties about the future, both in terms of at a personal level with safety, but also about longer term job security. And HR, I think, play the pivotal role in making sure that those your company's position is communicated well to those type of workers as we go forward.
Absolutely. Really interesting insights there, Dan. Amit, let's talk about the value and importance of creating an effective learning ecosystem in the organizations.
So I think, yes, Dan made some really important points here, and building up on them. And my comments mostly come from our interactions with our customers, and we see real change happening at all our customers' end in real time, and also from interactions with the people who are looking to address the new context and looking to find solutions for how will they have the team working, learning, and scaling up. So I think what we have seen now, there's a tremendous shift, and there's a real shift which is happening. Is most companies have realized that there's a need to move the responsibility and even the control to take up learning from the company to the employees. So in our last 4 or 5 months of interactions, we have seen there's a big shift in how people look at learning. L&D functions, even HR functions, they're now looking to place more responsibility in the hands of the employees themselves to seek and learn and reskill or upskill, whatever the need of the situation would be. And this comes both from the fact that L&D leaders are already short on time and need to devise and implement learning strategies. And even if they have more time, we discussed the reaction time has to be much less than it used to be. So they need to kind of cut away all the processes they used to have, so that learners can go and learn quickly, because things are changing very, very fast. So one option which we have seen is that to go fully digital in learning. And when I say digital, I'm not saying just e-learning or self-paced learning. It is a mix of many elements which will comprise the entire digital environment, right from e-learning to virtual live trainings to mobile learning to collaboration, like, for example, using shorter but interactive content where the learners don't have to spend a lot of time on learning things. They can quickly consume content just for the purpose they are looking for, just in time learning. So they don't have to really sit and plan their learning. So when I need something, I can go and find what I need to learn. And again, this all would be possible if we put more responsibility in the learners' end to seek and consume learning. Things like micro learning, giving, because one of the biggest factors of burnout is also sitting in front of the laptop or computer for a long time. So can we have micro learning, mobile learning work well for the learners? They don't have to sit in front of a computer to learn things. And some of the practical things we have learned from our customers is they do live trainings through Zoom, Teams, WebEx, GoToMeeting, but they try to now organize larger groups at the same time. So one is, there is the frequency of these meetings is reduced because you are doing more people at the same time, and also you reach wider audience with the same message very quickly. Now, we've also, and again, some of these have been around for a long time, and there's a need to build upon them. But maybe the COVID has really pushed them to the forefront, and the need is more stronger now. Is to design and encourage peer learning interactions. Let people learn from each other. And not make it very formal. Let it be an informal learning process. But and this, of course, technology will play a big role. Where do they have the right tools to collaborate, communicate? How do they share their experiences in learning? And while, yes, these are all some of the practical things we've seen, from my side, I definitely want to emphasize on one thing, is that there is a need, and this again comes from both an L&D perspective and also a business owner perspective, is there's a need to be very transparent with the employees. Everybody knows what is happening around us, and we just need to be very, very transparent. And it is not to scare anybody, and also at the same time, we don't have to sugarcoat any situation. Everybody is aware. Is to I think make people involved in the realities of the business, and work with them very, very closely to see, okay, this is what is happening, and all of us need to take up the mantle and say and figure out the best way to find this solution. And self-learning and not really waiting for trainings to happen is going to be the important part. So I think from my side, that's what I would say would go into building an effective learning ecosystem. And of course, I'm sure Dan has, he is in the thick of the things in terms of building solutions for the large workforce, and we help them wherever we can. But I'm sure Dan has a lot of more practical points to really figure out how to do this.
I wouldn't say we'd necessarily figured out how to do everything, Amit. If we had, I'd be paid a lot more than I am today. But it's been an experience for the last few months, certainly.
Great. Thank you, Amit. I think those were very practical insights, going digital with learning, virtual live training, digital collaboration, at the same time being flexible with the device and obviously being transparent at each step. Wonderful. Dan, what are your thoughts on creating learning ecosystem?
I think, and I'm smiling because I think this is one of those questions that's difficult to answer as a one-size-fits-all response. So a lot of my reply here, I think, will probably be tailored to ISS, which, as I said, is it's almost a 95% blue collar or frontline workforce, delivering a range of different services across cleaning, security, catering, and so on. But I guess, look, this year we've seen a total overhaul of how learning and development professionals need to operate in countries where COVID is still a major issue, and it's becoming increasingly not challenging, but more rigorous processes are clearly required, especially where we're seeing areas in Europe, for example, where we're seeing lockdowns and then opening ups and then further lockdowns in this roller coaster of events. And in those areas, we have to be honest with ourselves. The traditional model right now of classroom training is dead. We can't get people in large groups. We can't fly them around if you're in a large country, or if you have multinational or international training for leadership development events and conferences and so on. So we need to pretty much go back to the drawing board and relook at our objectives as L&D professionals, and then what vehicles we have available to us in order to get that content or those learning experiences out to our people. And what makes it a little bit more fun, to be honest, is that the expectations of our people remain the same. They still want the same quality of learning, despite everything else that's going on. And in fact, the need for engagement and this rapid reskilling for remote workers, if you're a white collar traditional worker, and an increased focus on safety if you're a blue collar worker, it's become higher than ever for us. So there's an increased focus on L&D in some of those areas. On a different note, though, and this piggybacks off Amit's point, is I don't think we can understate that knee-jerk responses of, let's virtualize everything, let's just turn everything we have into an e-learning module. That's not a recipe for success either, right? That switches almost your entire focus to self-driven learning, which absolutely has its place, but unless, again, that's part of your organizational culture before you started, it's going to be hard to bring it in an environment like this. So what we're starting to see is that blended approaches where it may be that it's a collaboration exercise over Teams or Zoom, they still maintain person-to-person engagement, and that's remaining completely critical in the L&D space. So the role of a learning and development professional and a training facilitator has actually become ever more critical in building that sense of cohesion and forming a group of people who are all connecting from home offices and sites around a country or around the world into that learning group or cohort, and encouraging them to work together and to collaborate and to learn together, both in those virtual environments, but also making sure they know what pathways are available to them when they leave a Zoom call. So I guess for us, what we're seeing is that traditional, again in inverted commas, like self-directed e-learning, those sort of initiatives will help with an immediate pivot. So if you have a sudden rush to compliance. And let's be fair, most of us probably have at some level in areas like, COVID knowledge or workplace safety and sort of, more general health and safety training right now. Learning and development is going to play a super critical role in creating, HR's learning ecosystem by being probably the key avenue, if not one of the key avenues, for improving both the capabilities of working in environments like this, but also the confidence that people have to do it as well. So we have capabilities and technical skill sets, and then we have that level of comfort, unconscious competence, where people just adopt this as part of their everyday work methods. And that's the change journey that we're starting to lead ourselves on. And I'm sure plenty of people watching this are probably going through the same journey. So fundamentally, what L&D do in creating what we want to call an effective learning ecosystem right now is it's a cultural change. It's about making sure that there is this culture of openness and transparency and being willing to change in response to what's going on, rather than burying heads in the sand and pretending it's not happening. That is probably going to be the most critical element in bringing the rest of the organization with you on that journey.
Very well said, Dan. I think having a culture of openness does make employees have a stronger sense of engagement and loyalty towards the team and company. Okay, that takes us to our next question, Amit. How critical is it to design innovative approaches to skill building? Can you share some insights on that?
So I think, one of the points which Dan mentioned is very, very pertinent here, which is, one single approach will not really work. And even if it is like ISS is a highly, concentrated blue collar workers company, there are other companies which have a decent mix of both white and blue collar, some are only white collar companies. So I think a single approach will not really work. And again, picking from Dan's last point, and which is where it all finally, the proof is in the pudding, is what is the culture we are able to build in the future. And because it's a culture change, it's not just a change in the tools or how do we deliver or manage learning. It is actually a change in the culture. And as I said, transparency and, as Dan mentioned, openness culture, they are the key to build whatever we are trying to build for the future. And when we are kind of working on this change in the culture, I would say that the approach of lifelong learning, which has to be built in every employee's workflow. So the learning has to become a part of the workflow of each employee. It cannot be a side function which they do for a number of hours in a year. It has to become a part of their workflow. It has to become an automated or a natural part of how they perform their work. So the learning, lifelong learning, not just learning a few things, lifelong learning has to become a part of the employee's workflow. And there are two kind of skills which I can see becoming important. One, of course, is the core skills you need for performing your functions, which are your core function skills. But this new context is also going to bring in need to learn the new skills or the softer skills, like how to work remotely, how to have an open communication, how to trust each other. Trust. And this is not just a survey. This is what we have seen. Is how do we trust when we don't even see people for a long time on the virtual meetings? How do we trust what is happening in the meetings? And a culture of teamwork, empathy, like in this very practical example, when we have a team call or an all hands call, and there are like 70, 80 people on the meeting, and then a few cannot join because of the internet connection or anything else, there has to be enough empathy built in to understand and, kind of figure out, yes, this is possible. And from a skill perspective, I think the culture has to also foster a skill of critical thinking, where we slowly enable more and more people, empower more and more people to take decisions which are important and critical for the business, and also decentralize the process of decision making to a large extent. And this has to happen irrespective of the role and title of an employee. It is not that certain level will need more training or less training. It is not that. Every employee will need to have some of these skills, like collaboration, self-expression, even creativity, innovation, remote project management, how to be safe mentally and physically, self-confidence, and even things like how to operate in a fully digital environment. And like Dan mentioned, the key is to go blended. Use live trainings or self-directed trainings or something else. So that how to really operate in an environment which is fully digital. If your company is not used to virtual meetings before COVID happened, it is going to be hard to adapt to that situation. But yes, these are the skills we need to really build, because we can't deny their presence in our our context anymore. And I think also in case of, like, in the context of L&D functions, when they're designing the overall learning activities, or defining how to take this further, they also have to be very, very careful of the increased fatigue which is happening in with people working remotely and virtually. So I would say a big part will be to assure people that yes, it is not an employee's own responsibility. It is a collective effort to reach to a new solution. And I would say, in terms of training and learning function, reducing the frequencies of learning activities which are compulsory by the company, and making them aware of how to be fully digital. And as I said, use more devices, try to keep them away from the laptop at some point in time, so that the stress is less. So some of these things will really help. And I think while they are not really very, very innovative, but these are some things which we have not tried a lot before. And these might become the cornerstone or the centerpiece of how do we want to take this forward.
I think some really great practical points there, Amit. Dan, what are your thoughts on this? Would you like to add on to anything what Amit just highlighted?
I think the fatigue point's critical. I think it's understanding that there's going to be an odd situation for a period of time where there's at least we're seeing this, where there's this assumption that everyone suddenly has more time because they're working from home, which is massively counterintuitive. But where there's also going to be an increased focus on certain kinds of training as a result of COVID. And in an industry like ours, and again, I can't necessarily speak for a 100% white collar organization who are completely office based, but for us, certainly there's going to be, and it's true, and there's going to be both stick and carrot to this, right? So compliance in our line of work has become more important than ever. We deliver cleaning and hygiene and disinfection services in hospitals and schools and public transport hubs. So it's not something that we can afford to compromise on. So the quality of our training needs to be high. The reach of our training needs to be high. And we need to be carefully selective with what we prioritize and when we do it, so that we don't have an overload of new virtual trainings or new e-learning modules or new training platforms invested in suddenly because we think it's an appropriate response to this increased need. What we actually desire is a carefully managed introduction and prioritization of training materials. So we're seeing that focus on compliance on the one hand, but we're also seeing individuals that are they're just stepping up to the plate right now. So they are people that we might not have necessarily have expected it from. Now, I'm not saying that they weren't flagged in some way, but they are demonstrating an above expected level of resilience, of flexibility with remote working, remote learning, and it's through understanding effective ways to do remote learning that an organization is going to be able to maintain momentum in whatever strategies you were, probably halfway through implementing when COVID hit. So it's about exploring new ways of doing things. It's about encouraging, exploration, innovation, being willing to make mistakes and get it wrong. So long as, the response to that is, let's pick myself up, try something new and see if that works better. And, rewarding those guys who are approaching it with open arms, because they're the guys and, guys and girls that are going to help keep the organization moving forwards. And the flip side of that coin, if we're, honest with ourselves, is that we're all going to have some stakeholders who are going to find that harder than others. And the unfortunate truth of what's happening in the world right now is that there are going to be some leaders in some organizations at significant levels who are it's going to become sink or swim for them, because this isn't a self-imposed crisis. This is something that needs to be responded to and adapted to if business survival is going to continue. So the best piece of advice I think that I can give from what we've been going through is, don't be afraid to admit that there might be somewhere in your organization that needs to be developed. If you've got initiatives that need to be rethought or updated as a result of where things are changing. In fact, nothing should be off the table at this point, because, historically, it's quite possible that you've been like me and you'll have looked at a number of different learning and development solutions and technologies and innovations that will have been seen at the time as having some novelty value, but maybe at the time less applicability to driving learning or business outcomes. But now they might well be in a position to offer more value in a world where the, again, quotes, old ways of doing things either don't apply anymore, or simply we can't do things that way. So I would encourage you to explore what other organizations, particularly those that have a focus on learning and training specialists, what are they doing with technology? Build new partnerships with them, explore things. That could be, as Amit said, increasing focus on bite-sized mobile learning. It could be investing in virtual reality technology and 360-degree videos and site inductions. Could even extend to facilitating, entire virtual training sessions with mini TV studios that you set up in offices that aren't being used so much anymore in an empty meeting room. So, you've got a range of ways to do things, and it's probably fair, also to admit to yourself that maybe there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution that will suit your organization. You may have to use a range of different approaches depending on your target audience, where they're based, how they're operating, and so on. But now's an optimum time to take a fresh look at it, really. Whether you like it or not, rethink how you're doing things. Ask yourself, challenge yourself if you've been doing things in the best way leading up to COVID, and if now is a chance to build a new foundation for how you might do things in the future. And that's, I'm hoping, is a slightly more positive note to sort of finish this block on, because it doesn't have to be negative when we rethink things. The increased focus on working virtually and delivering L&D experiences virtually will have led to a reduction in travel. We're certainly not flying people around anywhere, mainly because the planes aren't flying. But that's also then reducing an organization's environmental impact, because there's literally less travel going on. The time commitment's being reduced. When we used to have to ask key leaders in the organization to dedicate a 3-hour block for an off-site training workshop somewhere, and now that's being delivered in 2 or 3 hour webinars over a period of a couple of weeks with homework assignments and little projects to run on. You're still keeping up the momentum, but you're freeing people up so that they're not losing chunks of their day job time as well. And so all of this kind of packages up into a situation where actually your learning and development offering or your portfolio can now be served up to an audience that may be much, much broader now, and include people who previously might not have been in a position to get involved with your stuff in the first place.
Thank you, Dan, for those great pointers and inputs. A lot to learn from that. This brings us to our last point, Amit. In this era of constant disruption and technological advancement, how important is it to invest in employees' development?
So I think it is a symbiotic relationship which is becoming more stronger now, and it is absolutely imperative that we build and invest in employees' development from the perspective of future and what is going to happen in the future. So it's almost like trying to future-proof your workplace by building your employee skills, because as I said, things have really changed. What used to be okay and how we used to perform our functions, there is no more relevant anymore. And as I mentioned before, there are new skills to be learned by everyone. And it is in our own interest as a company, as an organization, and also as individuals to invest in our development and make sure that we are ready for the future to come. I think one important factor here is, and especially for L&D and HR functions, is that there has to be constant assurance to employees and alleviating any of their concerns or anxiety about the uncertain future. Yes, nobody knows what is going to happen in the next 12 months. Will COVID stay? Will it go? Will the vaccines work out or not? Will it something else happen or not? But I think it is important that there is enough assurance to employees that the futures of them and the company are linked together. None of them is going to succeed without each other. And from that perspective, if we strengthen the employer-employee relationship, and as Dan mentioned, there is a need to be able to strengthen this from a virtual perspective. I think that would really be very, very helpful and required. So I'd say there has to be a more emphasis on how we can collaborate and communicate effectively and differently from what we used to, because that is what has really changed, and that is really a big change for all of us. And that affects our culture, the way we perform. It also affects, the rate of our fatigue or burnout, but that has to be addressed. So investing in those areas and then enabling our employees' development, that is an imperative part of how we work.
Great insights again, Amit, especially the part on strengthening employer and employee relationship. Dan, would you like to add something onto this?
I think I would. There's not a tremendous amount that I'd add to what Amit has already said, but particularly from a learning and development perspective, there are just a couple of, I guess, they're not warnings, they're just learnings for us as we've gone through this. And the first one is, make sure you know what your employees need when choosing what direction you're going in with your investment, because right now there are a lot of leaders in organizations scrambling to meet needs that will range in priorities, and that they may be, for want of a better word, projecting a little bit. So finding out where your current workforce may be struggling, where they're achieving, at the level they were previously, but what new challenges have opened up as a result. It's going to be a question of again, as I said before, prioritizing and targeting your learning and development offering, but also, and this is something that we're really learning, particularly with some of the new platforms and tools that we're trying to use to collaborate and to work together and to communicate now that people are working more remotely, is don't make assumptions about what you think your people know. So when I say make sure you know what they need, it's a dialogue with them to find that out. It's not about making a judgment call from an ivory tower. It's actually communicating with them, identifying those challenges, because one of the things that L&D will need to do is help people find out what they don't know. So that would be, there are going to be myriad tools, options, platforms, whatever, that they don't know exist, but may make their new working situation easier than it used to be. And being in a position where you don't just teach employees the nuts and bolts of how to use, I don't know, let's go with Zoom as our example again. You don't just teach them the granular level stuff, but you also teach them the bigger picture around how those platforms can be used in a range of situations, from meetings to town halls to conferences to training sessions. That's going to help them respond to your questions around what do you want to learn with a much greater level of accuracy, because what you're first of all doing is going, here's the breadth of what we could explore together. And then you need to help us make those decisions, because for a lot of companies, this has not been the best year. So it's not about throwing, unlimited investment into learning opportunities. We need to target, we need to prioritize so that we don't overload people who are already fatigued by the situation, and help, again, bring them with us on that learning journey in a way that they feel as though they have ownership of the process as well.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing those really insightful points. Before we take the audience question, Dan, any last word of advice for our viewers? Any one or two takeaways, or actionable takeaways that you would want to leave our audience with?
We're not stopping. L&D is not going to stop throughout COVID, and that's fundamental. Like, there are going to be some organizations and some people in organizations, and we probably all know some of them, who will see certain L&D initiatives as less relevant because of what's going on at the moment. And I'm not saying they are wrong, but the risk that comes with that is that L&D as a function becomes seen as less important. And actually, it's never been more critical, because any shift or pivot to a new way of doing things, and I mean both, when we're talking about the way that learning and development is practiced in your organization, but also the broader organizational level changes that we're going to see in moving to these new ways of work, is L&D is playing this critical role. It's a key interface between HR and the rest of the organization, because we're lucky enough to touch more people than most in terms of how we can get an organizational cultural message out there. So we help to drive new ways of working, new ways to engage, new ways to lead, and we are the guys who model best practice. So it's while there's going to be, like I said, stakeholders that you may need to feel like you drag along with you a little bit on the journey more than others, just don't be afraid to revisit things you've discarded before, or approach new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking that previously you'd have brushed aside and said, this won't work for us. Well, it might now. Things are so different. This is the opportunity to explore, to take risks. And because of the state we're in, this isn't going anywhere. It's going to be like this for the foreseeable future in a lot of countries. So treat it as an opportunity, and grab it with both hands.
Very well summarized. Amit, would you like to add some points, add some actionable takeaways on the points that Dan just highlighted?
So yeah, I think Dan summarized it very, very well. So I think from my side, yes, there's a big change. The whole paradigm has shifted, and as Dan said, whenever there's a new way of doing things, L&D now, and in today's context, L&D is super important, and they have a huge responsibility to. One is there has to be a shift from training to learning, which goes on into our earlier points where we were saying that the learners have to have more responsibility for learning now. And technology will now become the centerpiece, because if you see, there is a convergence happening between communication, collaboration, and learning. And the L&D has to then start preparing for this convergence. So from my side, I would say it's a time which is, kind of almost, it is actually a good thing for L&D, because there are a lot of things which you are doing now have been around for about many years, and we just were finding ways to implement those solutions. So I think this may be a very good, of course, it's not a good time per se, but this may be a good opportunity for the L&D to experiment, to implement the right solutions for all the employees.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan and Amit, for those great and practical insights. I'm sure our audience had a lot to learn, and I can see a lot of engagement happening in the chat section. We're getting a lot of questions. So quickly, let me open the questions for our attendees. The first question that we'll pick is from Jaya Raman. She asks, how to plan behavioral training online? Any thoughts? Amit, you want to take up, or Dan, you want to go first?
So I think there are two parts to that. One is the short term, and one is the long term approach. As I think Dan mentioned that in the short term there is an immediacy to change everything to live training, which is there. So I think for some of the behavioral trainings, let's say in the earlier times we used to have a classroom training where there will be an expert who will come and share their experiences with the employees. I think just in the short term, moving a part of that to virtual, and not e-learning or self-learning, but virtual. So the same expert, they can deliver that experience through a Zoom or a Teams or a GoToMeeting kind of environment. That would be definitely very helpful. And of course, Dan can add because they may have already done a lot of these trainings for their employees. So Dan can add from there his experience, what they have used in this context.
Yeah, the short answer to that question, when we're talking about online trainings, is it's not easy. Behavioral change is not affected most effectively when you've got someone sat at home in front of a computer. It's that simple. So one of the biggest challenges that we have to overcome is how we think about giving people scenarios and environments and situations where we might be able to provide them with a concept, or here's how we want to take your behavior from A to B. But unless you have the chance to apply that, it's very likely that what you're turning your behavioral change training into is a tick box exercise where you display some learning points and then you go, fantastic, their behavior has changed. And then they get out into the real world and actually it hasn't. So you've got a number of options at different tiers. As Amit said, a ideal situation might well be that you run whether it's role play or whatever, scenarios where you've got people connecting on calls together, and you're exploring different behavioral models. You're looking at the impacts of those behaviors. The most important thing is, giving people a reason to want to change their behavior. So incentivize them, demonstrate, the outcomes of doing things correctly versus the outcomes of doing things incorrectly. And one of the projects that we worked with Upside on a couple of years ago was how we could build some online material that supported one of our big service culture training programs. So we have a really successful program that is delivered as a face-to-face workshop, a full-day workshop for our frontline staff. So again, cleaners, security guards, food services assistants, and how to ensure that they're delivering the best possible customer service. And obviously a huge part of that kind of training is going to be behavioral change. And the best way that we could kind of chunk down these, a full day workshop into something that could be delivered online, because you're not doing 8 hours of e-learning, that's not going to work, was giving people scenarios. And in those e-learning modules, it's not just, a written question of what do you do next? It's animations or little video sequences where you see the scenario play itself out, and you also get to see the impact of doing things wrong. So it's not just that you got that wrong, stop and try again. It's the scenario will continue to play out, and you'll see what happens when it goes wrong, and you need to try and fix it afterwards, because that's much more realistic in terms of how you can affect behavioral change. So I hope that's partly answered your question, if not given you sort of the silver bullet to it.
Great. Moving on to our next question. I think it's a very relevant question, which a lot of, companies would want to insights on. Charmi here asks, could you please share your suggestions on how can a company start digital learning with limited financial obligations? Can you share some action points to create environment of learning digitally?
So I think, in today's world, there are a lot of options available, where the financial obligation really may not be the stumbling block. All the tools, and I'm sure, like us, a lot of companies, we also have, we are sensitive to the fact that people are going through a big change. So, from a financial standpoint, we do our best to make sure that, because our objective is that customers can use good solutions for their employees' development. I think more than the financial obligations, it would still be a key to list what really you want to do in the short and the long term, and then implement the right solutions mix, because the solution may not be available in one or two tools. It may need to be a kind of an ecosystem for communication, collaboration, learning. But yes, I think from of course, we have multiple options for customers, even with small user bases. And where the financial, we have not seen the financial becoming a kind of an obstacle in employing somebody like us to help with their digital learning. But there are a lot of options available. So I think, but before then, I would advise that it will be better to plan and think, and then invest money in what they really want. Otherwise, the money spent may not really be of any use, and then it may become a bigger financial obligation to reinstall everything and re-implement everything new.
Do you know what? It doesn't mean buying something, I think. So in answer to Charmi's question there, when we talk about limited finances and wanting to build a culture of something, they don't often go hand in hand. because there's often at a certain level of an organization an assumption or a belief that, oh, if we want to change things, we need to buy this product, or we need to invest in a subscription to something else. Actually, if you're building a learning culture from the ground up, first step is identify those needs. What is it that you're trying to address in your organization? What needs do the people have? Make sure you understand that before you start trying to work out solutions. And then those solutions don't need to take the form of going to market and looking for vendors. What it could be is saying, how can I address that learning need myself, or with the help of other experts in the organization, in a way that we can use with the tools that we already have. So, and that doesn't mean a homemade solution by any stretch, but it could mean, get creative, make your own. Everyone working in, not everyone, let's be fair, but a lot of people in organizations now will have smartphones with cameras. You can produce your own training videos quite easily using free software, or even the stuff that comes installed on your phone. There's going to be content available already on YouTube and Vimeo that you can link to public facing pages that are free, like your company's Facebook page or similar things. So there is a vast network of free to access technology and software that would probably be a great starting point. And as soon as you've demonstrated the value of being able to do that, what I'd hope is that your other stakeholders will see the value as well, and you may well start to receive a little bit more of the investment you might be aiming for.
I think though, really brilliantly explained, creating your own learning modules. I think that's like a genius way to, start your own internal learning. Moving on to the next question, Jayant here, very interesting question again. What can be the attributes of an employee willing to learn so that we can reach them beforehand? Or can we predict the target group rather than targeting them all? Amit, you want to go, or yeah, go ahead.
No, I'll try, because it's a multi-part question, and I think there's a context behind the question which we may not be aware of right now. So, but I think it all starts from how what do you really want to achieve out of the objectives here, and why are you looking to group learners into, why do you need to find attributes or parameters for the learners? So I think it'll start from what is your learning strategy, and if this question is linked to one particular program where you identify who are the best fit for that program, maybe yes, but otherwise I think it will start from your learning strategy as a whole.
It is. Do you know what? It's a bigger question, and it's going to be. It's informed not in a small way by your talent pipeline and your that question. I would hope, Jayant, would have been answered before it's come to your door as a learning and development professional. It's about who are you finding to come and work in the organization? Are you finding the right people who have a willingness to learn, who have demonstrated at the point of application or interview that they have a desire to increase their skill set in such and such an area? So there are some fairly basic level things that can be done at the early stages, so that you make sure you don't bring in people who make it very clear that they don't want to learn in your organization. But also, as you go forward, if you've got platforms in your organization that are I don't know quite what the best term is, but that kind of catalog-based approach where you've got a library of material that people are invited to come and access, you'll pick up very quickly on which employees are going there in their own time and are accessing content that isn't mandatory for them, but they want to broaden their skill set. And that's one way to categorize a certain group of workers, would be who's gone and sort out training opportunities that aren't just part of their day job or their existing position requirements.
Okay, great. One last question. I think we're running out of time. I'll quickly take Neha's questions here. How do we measure impact of e-learning program? Is it even possible? For an 8-hour workshop, we never measured impact, and there is always a constant pushback. Measuring impact. Amit, you want to take this first?
So I think it's one of the most difficult areas in the learning domain, and not because. So I think it is. I would say it's from our experiences, we have spoken with a number of customers. It's not important to measure impact within the same day of training, because all training activities, they impact last longer than just a day. Some of the activities may have an impact 3 months down the line, and it's a gradual change. If it's a behavioral training, the change may happen in the next 6 months, the impact may appear in the next 6 months. So I think in my experience so far, the idea will be to look at impact points outside the training. Look at the job they are doing, and also the impact measurement starts well before your training activities. You have to start measuring certain parameters even, let's say, a couple of years before you start doing some training activities, so that you have a benchmark of some factors, and they are still not very accurate and very defining, but the impact has to start way before the training happens. So you start creating some parameters you want to really measure it better. For example, employee revenue per employee, or for a certain profile, you want to measure the time spent in an activity, and then you do some training. Then after 3 months, you again measure that time spent in the activity. And this also, the underlying factor is that in those 3 to 4 months, things may have really changed. Like COVID happened within a day. So how do you even measure that with the same benchmark, which are now no more relevant? So it's a little difficult thing to measure. But yes, some measurements can be done, but they have to precede the training, much before the training. That's my take on that.
No, I'd agree. I think that's a really fair point. It's anytime, look, if you can write a successful theory on how to measure the impact of L&D activities, you are going to become an incredibly successful person. Because one of the challenges that I think a lot of L&D professionals face in their organization is, well, what was the impact of that program? How do we know that it's working? How can we measure the specifics of this one element of an employee's development when obviously their entire work life is going to be impacting their performance, their engagement, and so on. So it's always going to be hard to quantify. I think what Amit focused on there was know why you're doing the training in the first place. What are you trying to improve? Is it just there because it has to be and there's a compliance exercise, or are you trying to drive one of your business metrics to move from A to B? And accept at the other side that yes, okay, great, our metric improved. It moved past B, in fact. Can it be attributed solely to a piece of e-learning, or is it part of the culture in which that e-learning is presented? Has there been new leadership, a new, policy or guidance or whatever it is that's come into play? At a more realistic level, because I want to try and answer your question without going, that's just a really hard question. The process of gathering feedback from individuals is probably going to be one of the simplest ways of doing it, at a systemic level. So it could well be, as often you'll have in an LMS platform, they've just finished, give us your feedback on that. And at a base level, that's often a rate it from 1 to 5, 1 to 10. It could be that you prompt them to make a commitment, whether that's part of the module or in the system that's hosting it, saying, what are you going to change tomorrow as a result of doing that training? And then using that information to nudge them 3 months later and go, don't forget, you made a commitment to do this. Are you still doing it? And if you've got, I don't know, a piece of training that you'd like them to do, maybe it's an annual training or not, you can prompt them 12 months after they've done the original e-learning. Hey, don't forget, you did this training a year ago. Has it stuck with you? Remember that these are the key points. How many of these do you think you've adopted in your everyday practices today? So I think we just have to be honest and go, it's rare that you're going to be able to point at 2 dots on a graph and go, our e-learning module moved us from A to B. But what you will be able to do is get probably more qualitative feedback from your employees to find out whether or not they are taking away the learnings that you want them to, because that's all really that you're going to achieve with the learning itself. The actual organizational change is going to be part of a bigger picture.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Amit, for those great insights and input. I'm sure our audience had a lot to learn. We are getting still a lot of questions, but I'll request you both to take this offline. We'll share the questions with you. So with this question and answer session, we are going to wrap up today's webcast. Once again, we thank our webcast partner, Upside LMS, and both Dan and Amit for sharing those invaluable information. Meanwhile, you can provide your feedback in the survey link provided in the chat section, because your input always matters. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Dan.